Peace and blessings, peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings.
All right, this is the Estin Community Church of Christ. First and foremost, my name is Archbishop Shamar.
And I'm Bishop Michaela.
We want to send all praises to the Most High Almighty, Ahaya Yeshahaya Christ, our Lord and our Savior. And once again, we're going to be going through more law, more things in the scriptures. So I would advise everybody bring your Bibles, your Apocryphas. Every single time we're going to be going through Latin law. We're going to be going back through some basics in the Bible after and before these lessons. All right. And giving people pertinent information that they're going to have to take and transfer somewhere else in order to retain. All right. Because once again, this stuff is a lot of stuff. And even lawyers, anyone who deals with this stuff, they have to have their documents, their things in order, their notes, because there's just so much in this world of law, all right, especially God's law or the Bible in general. All right, so with that being said, I want to say all praises be unto the Most High Almighty, Ahaya Yeshahaya Christ. Happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings.
All right, this is the Estin Community Church of Christ. My name is Archbishop Shamar.
And I'm Bishop Michaela.
And we be bringing forth today's report/lesson. Once again, this is the consuming fire, the image of God versus the image that provokes, the glorification of the Son. All right, part 8. And we just been showing and putting in perspective the story of the Bible. What did it start from? The whole Bible that we're seeing is about the image of God. And it starts with God creating his image, creating man and woman in his image, all right? The image of the Godhead, which we show is an image of feminine and masculine, all right? Mother and father, all right? And that image was created, and Satan, all right, who was Lucifer at that time, was told to give praise to this image, all right? Worship the image of God. And it starts with Satan not wanting to worship the image of God, which was Adam, all right? And he did not want to deal with Adam because Adam was created after him. And therefore, he didn't want to deal with that image, all right? And that is a violation against the image of God, all right? So we're going to see, and this creates a whole storyline here, all right? So Satan violates the image of God by not giving praise and worship onto it. He's cast it out. He then goes and takes attack on the image of God. He goes to Adam, all right? First, he goes through Eve because he knows that's the weaker of the flesh, all right? And through Eve, he's able to get to Adam and start destroying the image of God. And Adam, all right, was punished for that because the image of God is the Son, all right? This all goes back to Christ, who is the actual image of God. These are foreshadows of him, all right? And the Son always listens to the Father. And because Adam didn't listen to the Father, that was a violation against the image of God, all right? It then goes to Cain, all right, attacking his brother Abel, all right? And that goes against the image of God, where you attack the image of God. All right, these are two images of God's now, and you attack your brother, all right, and bring murder against your brother. This is why God says, if you hate your brother, you cannot love God, all right? That's a violation against the image of God, because the image of God loves his brother. All right, we then get to the corruption of the earth, the fallen angels coming down, all right, corrupting the seed of man, all right, corrupting the animals. This is why we have to have the flood, Noah. It goes down to Babylon, Nimrod, bringing the people to worship, all right, going against the image of God, all right, making the image of God bow down to falsehood, to idols, all right. The Most High had to confound the whole earth, confuse the earth. Reason why it's called Babel. All right, confusion. And from there, we see the story go taken on. We get into Israel the Most High giving them the law, them being the firstborn out of the nations, meaning from Adam's fall, he never gave the nations another command, another law, like how he gave the law to Adam and told him, don't do this. All right. He does that with the Israelites. And the Israelites proceed to continuously make their people and themselves go against the image of God by bowing down to false idols. It leads us to all the kings who, all right, would rise up, put away those false worships, and then it will come back again. We see Israel go into the 10 tribes, go into Persia, all right, Syrian captivity. All right, they get taken over there. All right, we see our people get taken from Babylon. Later, the Jews. All right, and then we get this whole 400 years of the Maccabees, the Hasmonean dynasty, Maccabean dynasty, the fighting back for the temple, and all of that. And then we got to, which was last week, the wars that was happening with Pompey, all right, the Roman general, and him being able to take down, all right, the Hasmonean kingdom, which is the Maccabean kingdom, all right, because there was war between the empire of Judah, all right, with the two sons. And through that, one son is, right, by Idumeite, is told that, hey, he should be going to get the throne, do all of that. He'll help him. And this is how the Israelites get into involvement with Rome, and Rome helping this son, and then now taking over the state of Jerusalem. All right, it was a kingdom of Jerusalem, and they reduced it to a state. And this son thought he was going to have his kingship and all of that, when really they reduced the power that the Hasmonean / Maccabean empire did under Hyrcanus. All right, and that was 63 BC where we ended, where Pompey took down Jerusalem and turned it into a state, all right, and was controlling the high priests. And we had Idumeites, or Idumeans, all right, which is Edomites, who were also part of that kingdom. So that's basically where we stopped there. All right, so once again, we're at page 95 in the document. This is the consuming fire, the image of God versus the image that provokes. The glorification of the Son. We are at part 8. Before we begin, we're going to go to Isaiah 53 and 1.
It's the book of the prophet Isaiah chapter 53 verse 1. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed?
All right. So who's going to believe our report? Isaiah had to ask this even in his time, because the Most High operates in a certain secrecy where he doesn't openly endorse the individual that he's dealing with. He sends the word of the Lord, and the word of the Lord, all right, you can see like with Samuel, comes onto them in the night, all right, and reveals what the Lord, all right, the Father has told unto him, all right, and the word of the Lord, that is Christ. And that individual sent out as a prophet to declare, thus saith the Most High. And it was always on the people to come to their own understanding, use their own senses. Yes, those same senses that we research all the things that we really want to know outside of God. All right, we know how to get to those things with our senses with no problem. We know how to get to, all right, is somebody lying with me? Is my partner lying with me? Is this? We know how to use those senses for all of those things. But those senses are really to be used to seek God and to understand God and to see his truth when it's faced there, to see a lie or a falsehood. That's what they're really for. Those other things are the exercises of them, all right? But the purpose that they were made for was to see God, hear God, find God, all right? And he's counting on us to use those senses to come to an understanding and his truth, that nobody is without excuse. His word has gone out to the whole world, all right, to the islands, to everywhere, where you think you can hide from. They all know Christ. You ask them the story, they're going to tell you, guess what? I know the Bible, all right? You don't need to tell me about that. Even though they need to know more about the Bible, they know enough of the Bible where they can say, I know the Bible. All right. They know the basic story. All right. So that being said, we're going to go through the scriptures and ensure that they're interpreted, translated, and taught correctly. All right. With that being said, we're going to go right into the lesson. Once again, we're at page 95. We stopped off at Pompey, all right, who attacks Jerusalem. He has a siege on Jerusalem because the two brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, all right, are fighting over who's going to lead the kingdom of Judah, all right. Aristobulus is king for the first time. This kingdom hadn't had a king for, I believe it was 421 years. They never had a king, and now they had a king and kings, and this is now happening. And now the two sons are fighting over the kingship, and Pompey uses that to attack because he takes the side of Hyrcanus. All right, and attacks Aristobulus and takes them down. Once again, they thought that they were returning and going to be a kingdom again, but the Romans reduced them and their kingdom and take back the kingdoms that they put under their submission under Hyrcanus, the first one who started this kingdom, all right, who stretched out the kingdom, all right, and now Pompey takes Jerusalem and he turns it into a state, and he's now backing the high priest that's there. All right, so I'm just going to run through a timeline that brings us up to Herod, because we're really getting to Herod and seeing how Herod came into place. All right, so Jerusalem after 63 BC, so that's 63 years approximately before the Christian era. All right, it turns it into a state. All right, we're going to be fast forwarding now to 48 BC. So we were at 63 BC. We're going to now go up to 48 BC, and we're going to see Julius Caesar and Pompey. They have a civil war between them. So they're two Roman generals, and now they have a problem. So last week we seen that Julius Caesar, Pompey, and they were all interconnected, and the Edomites, all right, where the Edomite went to the brother, told the brother he should be going back for his throne, all right, and that was headed by Pompey. But then we went to another part to see that Caesar really called it from high up, all right. These two individuals leading the army eventually is starting to war with each other, being Roman generals, and there's a civil war that brews out between Pompey and Julius Caesar. All right. He's actually defeated by Julius Caesar in 48 BC. All right. And Herod becomes king in 37 BC. So 11 years after Pompey is defeated by Julius Caesar, Herod becomes king. All right. You'll see that after, at the end, when everything is done and the temple's completely destroyed. All right, so that's after Christ and everything. That's 100 years later when Titus destroys the temple. All right, so that's 100 years from Pompey getting defeated by Julius Caesar. All right. And that's when the whole temple goes down. All right, so it's about 127 years from the Pompey, Jerusalem thing to the whole kingdom going down, the temple being destroyed, and the whole happenings of Christ. All right, so this time now has a lot of stuff crammed into it, where we're seeing the 400 years kind of stretched out. We have to go through a lot of stuff. This time, it's a lot of things happening between this last 130 years that's bringing us up to the New Testament, all right, where you see everybody go into. All right, so once again, we went through a lot of the Apocrypha. This is the missing 400 years. A lot of that was when we went into was in the Maccabees, which you could find in the KJV Apocrypha. All right, if you get a 1611 Bible, it'll be in the middle of that between the Old Testament and the New Testament. All right, we then went into the book of Josephus, the works of Flavius Josephus. We had to go into because this stops. The Maccabean Empire in the Bible, all right, in the Apocrypha, stops at a time about maybe 200 years before Christ, all right? And we have to fill in that time now in the works of Flavius Josephus, which is why we're going into that text, that historical text that was written by a Jew during these times, and we can see why God had the Spirit on him to make him do this, because we needed to document the history, because not a lot was going on at these times in terms of prophets and writing scriptures. All right, so we're going to go into a summary of Pompey's attack on Jerusalem and then bring it right up back to where we're going to start today.
Pompey's campaign against Jerusalem, 63 BC. The Roman general Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus Pompey annexed Syria in 64 BCE. To the south, in Jerusalem, a war erupted between two Jewish princes, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. After being besieged by Hyrcanus and his allies while worshiping in a temple, Aristobulus dispatched an envoy to Pompey asking for his help. In return for 17,600 pounds, which is 8,000 kilograms of silver, Pompey enthusiastically left Damascus, Syria, and upon arriving in Jerusalem was gifted a 1,760 pound, 800 kilogram golden vine. Pompey's intervention secured the peace. However, after Aristobulus made an excuse not to pay Pompey his silver, the general switched allegiance to Hyrcanus. Followed by Hyrcanus and his forces, Pompey attacked from the north, and using giant catapults, destroyed the temple where Aristobulus and his soldiers were stationed. After much bloodshed, Pompey occupied the temple and brought Roman control to Palestine. Pompey appointed Hyrcanus as high priest.
All right, so once again, Pompey occupied the temple, brought Roman control to the kingdom of Judea. All right, and he appointed Hyrcanus as high priest. They were fighting over the kingship, and he never became king. All right, so we're now going to go to now the end of Pompey's defeat. All right, and by Julius Caesar. All right, which is the Battle of Pharsalus. All right, so give us that.
Battle of Pharsalus, summary. Battle of Pharsalus, 48 BC. Decisive engagement in the Roman civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. Caesar had recently been defeated by Pompey when the two met again in Greece. Though Pompey had twice as many men, Caesar used unorthodox tactics to overwhelm him. Pompey fled and about half his men surrendered. The rest were killed or took flight.
All right, so once again, Caesar was losing. He got defeated a couple times by Pompey, but he then used unorthodox tactics and overwhelmed Pompey, and he made his men flee. All right, and the rest were killed. All right, so we're going to go now to after the death of Pompey, what starts to happen with the Jews and what they do again with Rome. And we're going to go to the works of Flavius Josephus for this. So this is once again, Pompey is going to die. You're going to see what happens after the death and what becomes of the Jews and the Romans' relationship now again.
The works of Flavius Josephus, book 14, containing the interval of 32 years, from the death of Queen Alexandra to the death of Antigonus, chapter 8. The Jews become confederates with Caesar when he fought against Egypt. The glorious actions of Antipater and his friendship with Caesar. The honors which the Jews received from the Romans and Athenians. Verse 1. Now after Pompey was dead, and after that victory Caesar had gained over him, Antipater, who managed the Jewish affairs, became very useful to Caesar when he made war against Egypt, and that by the order of Hyrcanus, for most Mithridates and Perganus was bringing his auxiliaries, and was not able to continue his march through Pelusium, but obliged to stay at Ascalon. Antipater came to meet him, conducting 3,000 of the Jews, armed men.
All right, so once again, Antipater, so Pompey is dead, and all right, Caesar gains victory over him, and Antipater, who's managing the Jews' affairs, become very useful to Caesar. So this same Antipater you're going to see is Herod's father. So he becomes the father of Herod later on. So once again, about 11 years later, you see Herod take the throne from these times here. All right. So that Antipater, once again, is is what's his name again? Herod's father. All right, he's gonna become the father of the great Herod. But continue for it, and he's the one that's handling or managing the Jewish affairs. So you see his relationship now. He's already high up in the ranks. All right, but continue for us.
He had also taken the principal men of the Arabians should come to his assistance, and on his account it was that all the Syrians assisted him also, as not willing to appear behindhand in their alacrity or alacrity for Caesar. Jamblichus, the ruler, and Ptolemy his son, and Ptolemy the son of Sohemus, who dwelt at Mount Libanus, and almost all the cities. So Mithridates marched out of Syria and came to Pelusium, and when its inhabitants would not admit him, he besieged the city. Now Antipater signalized himself here, and was the first who plucked down a part of the wall, and so opened the way to the rest, whereby they might enter the city. And by this means Pelusium was taken. But it happened that Egyptian Jews who dwelt in that country, called Onion or Nayan, would not let Antipater and Mithridates with their soldiers pass to Caesar. But Antipater persuaded them to come over with their party, because he was of the same people with them, and that chiefly by showing them the epistles of Hyrcanus the high priest, wherein he exhorted them to cultivate friendship with Caesar, and to supply his army with money and all sorts of provisions which they wanted. And accordingly, when they saw Antipater and the high priest the same sentiments, they did as they were desired. And when the Jews about Memphis heard that these Jews were come over to Caesar, they also invited Mithridates to come to them. So he came and received them also into his army.
All right, so you're seeing here that, all right, what's happening here is that, all right, they go down into Egypt, and there's Jews in Egypt, and these Jews in Egypt are now stopping them and trying to stop them from going through Egypt. All right, and they show them that they're of their brethrens with them. All right, and they now let them pass. All right, because he's showing them that they're of the same thing of Hyrcanus. All right, and they let them pass now. And the other Jews are seeing that they've come over to Caesar, so now they're going over to Caesar and they're being received. So Caesar is being received by the Jews in Egypt. All right. So we're now going to go to a next part of the works of Flavius Josephus, and we're going to see that Herod is trying now to move up in his rank. So he's coming on the scene now. He's trying to move up and get up in ranks, and what he's going to do in the kingdom or the empire to make this happen. All right, so we're at the works of Flavius Josephus once again.
The works of Flavius Josephus, book 14. How Herod, when he had married Marianne, took Jerusalem with the assistance of Sosius by force, and how the government of the Asmoneans was put an end to. Verse 1. After the wedding was over, came Sosius through Phoenicia, having sent out his army before him over the midland parts. He also, who was their commander, came himself with a great number of horsemen and footmen. The king also came himself from Samaria, and brought with him no small army, besides that which was there before, for they were about 30,000, and they all met together at the walls of Jerusalem, encamped at the north wall of the city, being now an army of 11 legions, armed men on foot, and 6,000 horsemen, with other auxiliaries out of Syria. The generals were two, Sosius, sent by Antony to assist Herod, and Herod on his own account, in order to take the government from Antigonus, who was declared all enemy at Rome, and that he might himself be king, according to the decree of the Senate.
All right, so what's going on here is now, during this time of Pompey and all of that, the Maccabees, they weren't dead. Their bloodline wasn't dead, so their bloodline was still there. So they were always fighting to make their bloodline because their bloodline gets to rule by right in that land. So they were always fighting within the law to get that right back to be rightful kings in the kingdom. All right. So this one, and Antigonus, all right, is king at this time because he's trying to prove that, hey, the kingship, the way Israel goes, it goes through a bloodline, and it's not even going through David's bloodline right now. They're saying, hey, we're attached to the Maccabean bloodline, and therefore we deserve to be kings over here. And this is what's actually happening at this time. All right. And what's happening now is that Herod wants to become king. And how he's going to become king, he's going to become king by decree of Senate. That's what he wants. Because once again, we're going to understand two things here today. What is de facto and what is de jure. And we're seeing this happen in the Bible right before us. So there's a kingdom here, the Judah, the people there, they have things that they go by right, all right, through their bloodline has been passed down. And Herod wants to usurp them and become king, but he has to go through a decree of the Senate, all right? And this is actually what will happen. So we're going to see the actual kingdom become a state, and we're going to get the difference between what a de jure kingdom is and what a de facto kingdom is, all right? Once again, so he wants to take Antigonus down, all right, so that he can be king by decree of the Senate, all right? And we all know what a Senate is attached to, just like presidency and all of that stuff. That's a part of a republic. So by the republic's decree on saying what's going to go on to that country that they feel they control, they're going to make him king, and not by the original way, by right, all right? Which, yes, it's God's mandate, all right? Heaven's mandate. All right, when they do what Most High wants to do. All right, so we're now going to go see and look at Herod taking Jerusalem by force and putting an end to the kingdom's reign. All right, so the Hasmoneans' kingdom's reign. All right, so tries to creep up again because they're proving their bloodline, they're proving their birthright, and now Herod is coming because he's going to be the one in control when Christ comes on the scene, and he's enforcing his power to take over the kingdom entirely. All right. So we're going to go to the works of Flavius Josephus again. We're at book 14. This is chapter 16. All right. And those are paragraphs. So paragraph 2.
The works of Flavius Josephus, book 14. How Herod, chapter 16, how Herod, when he had married Miriam, took Jerusalem with the assistance of Sosius by force, and how the government of the Hasmoneans was put an end to. Paragraph 2. Now the Jews that were enclosed within the walls of the city fought against Herod with great alacrity and zeal, for the whole nation was gathered together. They also gave out many prophecies about the temple, and many things agreeable to the people, as if God would deliver them out of the dangers that they were in. They had also carried off what was out of the city, that they might not leave anything to afford sustenance either for men or for beast. And by private robberies, they made the want of necessities greater.
All right, so here we're seeing that Herod is coming against the Jews. The Jews are standing up to Herod. The whole nation is together. So we're tracing the image of God and how they're dealing with the temple, the worship of God. At these times, they're very serious about keeping their sacrifices going, making sure there's no idols inside of there. So we're not going to see any of that. All right. So when Christ comes on the scene, he doesn't have a problem with them dealing with idol worship. All right. So we don't see Christ calling out, hey, there's idols inside of here. All right. That's not what's going on. The people have a zeal right now. All right. So the people have a certain zeal, and they're trying to keep the laws to the best of their ability. What we're going to see is that Christ comes on the scene, and they're not going to respect the true image of God, which is Christ. So that's where they fall. But if you're watching the story, anything pertaining to the temple, all of that, they're trying to keep the law to their best of their ability after learning all what happened during these times. All right. Inside of here, the Maccabean times. All right. So they're trying to keep the law to the best of their ability. All right. And give up the sacrifices. They're giving prophecies about the temple. They believe that God is going to make their kingdom come back. All right. So what you have to understand is that the Jews' mindset is that they're going to become a kingdom again. So they're a state right now. They're reduced. Their belief is that their Messiah is going to come and he's going to stop them. As long as they keep the law and don't have no idols in there, they're going to keep the temple. And that's what they're reciting all of these prophecies about the temple about. All right. But we're going to continue.
When Herod understood this, he opposed ambushes in the fittest places against their private robberies, and he sent legions of armed men to bring its provisions, and that from remote places, so that in a little time they had great plenty of provisions. Now the 3 bulwarks were easily erected, because so many hands were continually at work upon it, for it was summertime, and there was nothing to hinder them in raising their works, neither from the air nor from the workmen. So they brought their engines to bear, and shook the walls of the city, and tried all manner of ways to get in. Yet did not those within discover any fear, but they also contrived not a few engines to oppose their engines withal.
All right. So these engines, once again, so let me go into that word so people could, they're going to use that word quite a few. All right. It says it's a talent, it's a device. So an engine is a device. All right. A product of ingenuity or a plot or a snare. All right. So it's a device, it's a mechanism, it's a gadget, it's an apparatus. All right. It's a mechanical device. It's not necessarily the car engine. All right. It's not a car engine. It just means mechanical device. All right. Especially one that's used in war. All right. So it's a mechanical device that's used in war. All right. It has in it ability, deceitfulness, trickery. All right. Cleverness. All right. It's a war machine. So when you see engine, you're thinking of war machine and what they're putting together. All right. Not a car engine.
They also sailed out and burnt not only those engines that were not yet perfected, but those that were. And when they came hand to hand, their attempts were not less bold than those of the Romans. Though they were behind them in skill, they also erected new works when the former were ruined, and making mines underground, they met each other and fought there, and making use of brutish courage rather than prudent valor. They persisted in this war to the very last, and this they did while a mighty army lay around them, while they were distressed by famine and the want of necessities. For this happened to be a sabbatic year.
All right. So here we're seeing they're fighting out. All right. They're making their weapons. When when something is broken, they're rebuilding it. All right. They're making mines underground. All right. They're meeting each other underground and fighting underground. That's what they're telling you. All right. So this is where you see maybe on the History Channel where they bring you to some things where they're like, oh, look at this underground where they used to fight in war and they created this. They were doing all of this in this time. The Jews is well-oiled machine and the Romans are. All right. And the Jews, they don't have as much skill as the Romans, but they have as much valor and strength and, veracity in what they're doing as the Romans. All right. And they're battling it out. They're even battling in underground tunnels. All right. And this war is continuing. And what's also happening is that they're in a sabbatic year. So people might not understand what a sabbatic year is. In that year in the land, they make the land rest. So every 7 years, they allow the land to rest and they don't take anything out the land. So they haven't taken anything out the land. They don't really have as much food because they left it all outside. They didn't take from the land that whole time. It's a year of rest where you're just letting everything grow out there. So they don't have a lot in their stock as well, and they're battling in this year. All right, but continue for us.
The first that scaled the walls were 20 chosen men. The next were Sosius's centurions, for they were about the temple were burnt, which Herod gave out to have been burnt by Antigonus, in order to expose him to the hatred of the Jews. And when the outer court of the temple and the lower city were taken, the Jews fled into the inner court of the temple and into the upper city. But now fearing lest the Romans should hinder them from offering their daily sacrifices to God, they sent an embassage and desired that they would only permit them to bring in beasts for sacrifices, which Herod granted, hoping they were going to yield. But when he saw that they did nothing of what he supposed, but bitterly opposed him in order to preserve the kingdom to Antigonus, he made an assault upon the city and took it by storm. And now all parts were full of those that were slain, by the rage of the Romans at the long duration of the siege, and by the zeal of the Jews that were on Herod's side, who were not willing to leave one of their adversaries alive. So they were murdered continually in the narrow streets and in the houses by crowds. And as they were flying to the temple, for shelter, and as there was no pity taken of either infants or the aged, nor did they spare so much as their weaker sex. Nay, although the king sent about and besought them to spare the people, yet nobody restrained their hand from slaughter.
All right. So we're just seeing here that the Jews, all right, the Jews were dealing, and they're on the outside of the outer temple, and they're in the inner temple, and they want to give up their sacrifices. All right, and they're asking the Romans while it's going on to allow beasts in so that they could sacrifice. So what was happening here, you're going to see that the Romans and even Pompey, last week we seen that they didn't go in and look at the whole temple and expose it. There are certain parts of the temple that the Gentiles can't see, and Pompey and them were respecting the religious worships and the temple. Even now, they're respecting the religious worships and the temple. It was different when they were going against the Greeks and Antiochus. Antiochus took down the temple. He put the pig on the temple. He was doing all of that stuff. That's why we had the Feast of Dedication. They have to rededicate the temple, take away all what's it called again? The altar. Right? Redo the altar again and all of that because the Gentiles was defiling it. The Romans, when they're taking down Israel, they're giving a respect unto God at the same time. All right, and we're just taking notice of that, and they're allowing their sacrifices to come in, and they're thinking that, hey, maybe these guys will see that, hey, we're still respecting your religious worships. If you follow us, we'll still let you do your stuff, but we just want to take you over. All right, but they're seeing that they were only doing this, and they were only going more for Antigonus, and you know what I mean, they were trying to give him the kingdom, and Herod is now going, and he's sending all his men to slay them, and ensure that he's going to take the kingdom. All right. And once again, we're going to see here that he says there was no pity taken of either infants, the age, nor did they spare so much as the weaker sex. Nay, although the king about besought them to spare the people. So we're going to see that the curses of Israel, which is in Deuteronomy 28. All right, so let me go there real quick. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 28, and you're going to see that this stuff is being fulfilled here. And this is key because a lot of the stuff that happened with Israel is being fulfilled already before Christ comes. So they already been scattered in all nations. All right, they're already suffering the curses. The Most High is already setting the nation on them that's not pitying the young, the old, all of this. All right. And this is what he spoke about. Yes. So we're going to Deuteronomy 28 and 47. We're going to continue on to verse 50.
It's the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 47. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young.
All right. So already right now, the Most High is bringing this nation against them, and he's not regarding the young, the old person. This is what they're showing you here. They're already beginning this no pity stuff. So Israel's already beginning to come into this captivity that the Most High was speaking about. All right. So we're going to continue.
Yet nobody restrained their hand from slaughter.
All right, so we're back in the document now.
Yet nobody restrained their hand from slaughter, but as if they were a company of mad men, they fell upon persons of all ages without distinction. And then Antigonus, with regard to either his past or present circumstances, came down from the citadel, and fell down at the feet of Sosius, who took no pity of him in the change of his fortune, but insulted him beyond measure, and called him Antigone, a woman and not a man. Yet did he not treat him as if he were a woman, by letting him go at liberty, but put him into bonds and kept him in close custody. Paragraph 3. And now Herod, having overcome his enemies, his care was to govern those foreigners who had been his assistants. For the crowd of strangers rushed to see the temple, and the sacred things in the temple. But the king, thinking of victory to be a more severe affliction than a defeat, if any of those things which it was not lawful to see should be seen by them, used entreaties and threatenings, and even sometimes force itself to restrain them.
All right, so they take down Antigonus, all right, and they start calling him Antigone. They start calling him a woman, not a man, disrespecting the king, doing all of that, all right. And he says, you know what? He did not treat him as if he were one, but he kept him close to him, making because he knew that he's a threat, all right, and kept him in close custody. And now that he's overcome his enemies, once again, he's going to the foreigners, he's getting assistance from them, and these people want to see the temple. So once again, we're going to understand that the temple, it has walls. The city has walls. When you go to the temple, there's walls. Then there's an outer court. Then there's an inner court. There's a whole bunch of places sectioned off. So people have never really been able to see this famed thing that they heard about the Jews, this temple. So when they get taken down, the enemies want to see what's in it. This is why when you go into Lamentations, all of that, it speaks about the Most High lift up the skirt of Jerusalem. All right, that's because he's now revealing the secret stuff of the kingdom. All right, and that's what was happening. They want to come and do that, but Herod, once again, is paying a certain respect to the stuff and is stopping it. Stopping the things that would not be lawful to do. He's stopping it and paying. He's conquering, but he's not disrespecting God. That's what they're trying to do here, because that would be the disrespect to allow them to see the things that are not lawful according to God. But he's just conquering them and keeping these things in place. All right, but continue for us.
He also prohibited the ravage that was made in the city, and many times asked Sosius whether the Romans would empty the city both of money and men, and leave him king of a desert, and told him that he esteemed the dominion over the whole habitable earth as by no means an equivalent satisfaction for such a murder of his citizens. And when he said that this plunder was justly to be permitted the soldiers for the siege they had undergone, he replied that he would give everyone their reward out of his own money, and by this means be redeemed what remained of the city from destruction. And he performed what he had promised him, for he gave a noble present to every soldier, and a proportionable present to their commanders, but a most royal present to Sosius himself, till they all went away full of money.
All right, so what's going on now? They keep trying to go and ravage the city, and Herod is saying, hey, you guys are going to make me a king of a desert and take everything out the city of men and everything. All right, and he's showing them, okay, you want dominion of the whole earth, but that's no means to murder all his citizens or whatever. All right, but they were letting them know that the plunder is justly to be done. And why? Because you're going to understand in international law and stuff, when two people agree to go to war with each other, all right, a treaty can then happen, or when they get taken over, they are now possessors of their stuff, all right. So there's certain rules to war, and if they don't operate by that rules, then it goes to piracy, all right, and they become pirates. So in war, once the two people agree that they're going to go into battle, so if one person doesn't want to war and the next person is warning them, you can't really do that in war, all right? They have to both be agreed that they're going to battle. Then they go into the battle. one loses, whatever the other one wants to do now, they can do now because you've agreed now. And they get to spoil and take your spoils, and you would have to pay the other people burdens and all of that. This is normal in war, all right? And that's what they're letting them know, all right? That, hey, they came against them and plundering, they're supposed to be able to go and take the stuff. How do we know that? Because even when the Most High sent the Israelites to plunder people, the same thing was going on. All right, and there would be some times where the Most High is telling them, yo, from these people, don't take nothing. I don't want nothing from them. All right, we all know about one incident where they took something. He's like, hey, who took something? And he told them not to take nothing. And they're like, oh, they took the nicest of this, and he's like, hey, we're supposed to take nothing. They killed that whole family. All right, because they're so used to when you go to war, you take, what they call booty. All right. We'll continue for us. All right, so hold on. So what we're seeing here is that Herod, now what's happening now is Herod is telling them, hey, yes, you're permitted to do this, but I'm going to pay y'all. So Herod, what he wants to do, he wants to rule Judea. He's like, I'll try to destroy this stuff. He wants a place to rule. He wants a people to rule. He's going to pay out his own money to all the soldiers and the men, all the stuff that they're wanting for, all right? And he paid them out of his own pockets to suffice them so that they'll leave Jerusalem alone and that he could actually reign there so that we can get into the times of Christ. All right, so this is how bad Herod wanted to reign there, and he was protecting the sacred things of God and not allowing it to go completely desolate. So at this time, it should have already been desolate. All right, but Herod, by his power and his wanting to do that stuff, and this is the Most High's will that made that happen, he's stopping it from being and coming totally desolate, all right, because he wants his time to reign in the kingdom, all right, by decree of the Senate, all right, which has made him king. But continue for us.
Paragraph 4. This destruction befell the city of Jerusalem when Marcus Agrippa and Canonius Gallus were consuls of Rome. On the 108th and 5th Olympiad, on the 3rd month, on the solemnity of the fast, as if a periodical revolution of calamities had returned since that which befell the Jews under Pompey. For the Jews were taken by him on the same day, and this was after 27 years' time. So when Sosius had dedicated a crown of gold to God, he marched away from Jerusalem and carried Antigonus with him in bonds to Antony. But Herod was afraid lest Antigonus should be kept in prison only by Antony, and that when he was carried to Rome by him, he might get his cause to be heard by the Senate, and might demonstrate as he was himself of the royal blood. And Herod, but a private man, that therefore it belonged to his sons, however, to have the kingdom, on account of the family that they were of, in case he had himself offended the Romans by what he had done. Out of Herod's fear of this, it was that he, by giving Antony a great deal of money, endeavored to persuade him to have Antigonus slain, which if were once done, he should be free from that fear.
All right. So what we're seeing here, all right, is that now that Herod is ruling and these things is happening, all right, Herod has a fear, all right, and Herod's fear is that Antigonus, if he's kept in prison, all right, he's going to talk again and he's going to make his case to be heard, and he's going to say, hey, I'm to be ruling by de jure. And we're going to go into what all this stuff is, but he's going to be ruling by de jure. And what Herod is doing, he's ruling out of de facto, and he's the rightful ruler. And once again, when they're in law and all of that stuff, you don't rule against the law. So he's afraid that this thing, as much as their enemies, can happen if they go and ask him. They don't really know he's of the royal family. They're not asking all these questions, but he's saying if he stays in jail and lives, then he could go up and make people hear his cause and plead his cause that he's a rightful ruler, once again, in international law. All right. And Herod doesn't want that to happen, so he's persuading them that, hey, they should slay him right away. And if they slay him, he's going to be out of that fear, all right? Because Antigonus is going to show that he's from the royal bloodline, and Herod's a private individual. He's not of that, right? All right, but continue for us.
And thus did the government of the Asmoneans cease, 126 years after it was first set up. This family was a splendid and illustrious one, both on account of the nobility of their stock and of the dignity of the high priesthood, as also for the glorious actions their ancestors had performed for our nation. But these men lost the government by their dissensions, one with another. And it came to Herod, the son of Antipater, who was of no more than a vulgar family, and of no eminent extraction, but one that was subject to other kings. And this is what history tells us was the end of the Asmonean family.
All right, so the Hasmonean family, and here it says Asmonean, but it could be Asmonean or Hasmonean or Maccabean. All right, but they're counting from 127 years from Hyrcanus when he extended the kingdom and made them stretch. All right, because from the whole time, from these times inside of here, they were just fighting just to get their temple back and to rule in their temple. They didn't have people under submission and all of that. Under Hyrcanus, they subjected the Idumeans. They made them turn to Jews, which we went into that. This is the first time they made a whole next people turn to Jews. And they were already doing that, creating Jewish people ourselves, right? With our pride, wanting to make them do our customs. All right, so that stuff was happening. And once again, they said that this stuff, all right, they lost their kingdom because of dissensions with one another. Because they were fighting within the kingdom, they end up losing it. And this is how the kingdom came to Herod, who was nobody. All right, so Israel allowed all of this to happen. And for someone who's a nobody, a king who's subject to other kings, was able to now get the kingdom. All right, and this would have already been the desolation of Jerusalem. But Herod, you clearly see, wants to rule for a period of time. So he did all he can to give money, to protect the temple, to do all of that so that he could have something to rule over. And this is all making way and stage for Christ to come. All right. So once again, this is all for Christ to come. So from Hyrcanus extended the kingdom until they lost it completely to Herod. That was 127 years. All right. And now we're going to go now to Herod and him taking the spoils of Jerusalem after all of this stuff is down now. All right. So he puts the decree out for them to take out Antigonus. And we're going to see what he now does after this whole thing.
The works of Flavius Josephus, book 15, concerning Palio or Polio and Sameas. All right, let me just go back here. Containing the interval of 18 years from the death of Antigonus to the finishing of the temple by Herod, chapter 1, concerning Polio and Sameas. Herod slays the principal of Antigonus's friends and spoils the city of its wealth. Antony beheads Antigonus. Paragraph 1. How Sosius and Herod took Jerusalem by force, and besides that, how they took Antigonus captive, has been related by us in the foregoing book. We will now proceed in the narration, and since Herod had now the government of all Judea put in his hands, he promoted such of the private men in the city as had been of his party, but never left off avenging and punishing every private man, punishing every day those that had been chosen to be of the party of his enemies. But Polio, the Pharisee, and Sameas, a disciple of his, were honored by him above all the rest. For when Jerusalem was besieged, they advised the citizens to receive Herod. For which advice they were well requited. But this Polio, at the time when Herod was once upon his trial of life and death, foretold in way of reproach to Hyrcanus and the other judges, how this Herod, whom they suffered now to escape, would afterward inflict punishment on them all, which had its completion in time, while God fulfilled the words he had spoken. Paragraph 2.
All right, so just go into here. So, all right, so Herod takes Jerusalem by force. All right, he's now going and taking down anybody that's related to Antigonus and his friends. All right, and he's now put two people in place that he feels that was backing him and was making the people say, hey, receive me, receive me. All right, so he put those people into place. All right, so continue for us.
All right. At this time, Herod, now he had got Jerusalem under his power, carried off all the royal ornaments, and spoiled the wealthy men of what they had gotten. And when by these means he had heaped together a great quantity of silver and gold, he gave it all to Antony and his friends that were about him.
All right, so Herod, he gave up all his funds and everything because once again, he knew that he was going to plunder the city himself. So he's plundering the city. He's taking all the money from the wealthy men, all right, and he's giving it to his friend, all right. Antony and his friends are getting this money and gold and silver, all right, but continue.
He also slew 45 of the principal men of Antigonus's party, and set guards at the gate of the city, that nothing might be carried out together with their dead bodies. They also searched the dead, and whatsoever was found, either of silver or gold, or other treasure, it was carried to the king. Nor was there any end of the miseries he brought upon them. And this distress was in part occasioned by the covetousness of the prince regent, who was still in want of more, and in part of the sabbatic year, which was still going on, and forced the country to lie still uncultivated, since we are forbidden to sow our land in that year.
All right, so he's saying he's taking all of this stuff, he still wants more, and they're in a sabbatical year where there's not a lot in the country because things are uncultivated because they don't sow in the sabbatical year. All right, so all of this stuff is going on. Herod is setting up. He's killed, 45 of the main men, principal men of the party of Antigonus. All right, Antigonus. And now Herod has set up his kingdom. This is called the Herodian kingdom of Judea. So we're going to get a little understanding on what is the Herodian kingdom of Judea.
The Herodian kingdom of Judea. The Herodian kingdom of Judea was a client state of the Roman Republic from 37 BC, when Herod the Great, who had been appointed king of the Jews by the Roman Senate in 40 or 39 BC, took actual control over the country. When Herod died in 4 BC, the kingdom was divided among his sons into the Herodian tetrarchy.
All right. So when he died, the kingdom was turned into the Herodian tetrarchy. All right. So Herod was appointed king of the Jews. All right. So Herod was a king of the Jews, and we all see how he was able to get that. He got that through the Roman Senate. All right. About 39 to 40 BC. All right. So we're going to see when Herod takes all of this stuff, what starts to happen. All right. So he takes this stuff over. We're going to see that he's going to send for a priest, because what Herod wants to do, Herod doesn't want the bloodline of the people and the righteous ones to want to override him. So he's trying to do various things to keep his power. So we're going to see some of the things that was going on. We're also going to see that every time that the Jews are in captivity or down, there's a ally that always comes around that always has a problem with an enemy of the Jews that always, I don't know if purposely or whatever, but they always somehow is helping the Jews. And we're going to take a look at that, and that's connected to some prophecies that's in that's spoken about in our times, the end of the days. All right, but continue for us.
The works of Flavius Josephus, book 14, containing the interval of 18 years from the death of Antigonus to the finishing of the temple by Herod. Chapter 2. How Hyrcanus was set at liberty by the Parthians and returned to Herod, and what Alexandra did when she heard that Ananias was made high priest. Paragraph 1. Now after Herod was in possession of the kingdom, Hyrcanus the high priest, who was then a captive among the Parthians, came to him again and was set free from his captivity. In the manner following, Barzapharnes and Pacorus, the generals of the Parthians, took Hyrcanus, who was first made high priest and afterward king, and Herod's brother, Phasaelus, captives, and were taken away into Parthia.
All right. So what's happening here? Let's not forget Hyrcanus. He's the one that lost. He was taken into Persia. The brother was killed, Aristobulus. Everything was taken over. What we forgot about Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus was in Persia. All right. He's among the Parthians. The Parthians you're going to see are the Medes, the Iranians. All right. So when you're hearing Parthians, think of Iranians. They're seeing Hyrcanus, who was a high priest, and afterwards he's a king. All right. And they have Herod's brother. Herod's brother was under him as well. All right. So we're going to continue and see what's going on with them. All right. So they're going to speak with them. All right. And set them free.
Phasaelus indeed could not bear the reproach of being in bonds, and thinking that death with glory was better than any life whatsoever, he became his own executioner, as I have formerly related.
All right, so Phasaelus, he was Herod's brother. He was on Hyrcanus' side. He was taken. He gave up his life, thinking that he can't. It's better to take his life than to be under captivity of these people. And we're going to see what happens with Hyrcanus. All right, but continue.
All right. But when Hyrcanus was brought into Parthia, the king of Provokes treated him after a very gentle manner, as having already learned of what an illustrious family he was, on which account he set him free from his bonds, and gave him habitation at Babylon, where there were Jews in great numbers. These Jews honored Hyrcanus as high priest and king, and as did all the Jewish nation that dwelt as far as Euphrates, which respect was very much to his satisfaction.
All right. So we're seeing here that the king of Parthia, all right, brought Hyrcanus in. He was brought in to talk to him, all right, and he treated him after a gentle manner, like he already knew that this man was of righteous bloodline, all right. So what you're seeing here is that the nations round about, and we're paying attention to most specifically the Iranian nation, all right, the Parthians, all right, they respect and honor our certain rights. And this is what Herod is afraid of with Aristobulus when he was over there, that he's going to get a chance to speak to the authorities, all right, the people, the overseers of the kingdom, and they're going to respect the actual de jure rights, all right, so birthrights, the actual rights of the individual. So he's in this kingdom. He gets to speak to this king, and this king is already knowing that he's of illustrious family. He was a king. He's a high priest. He's a righteous bloodline. There's really nothing for him to be in bonds with. He didn't do anything to their country, all right? And he releases him, all right? He releases him, and now the Jews over that area are respecting him, and they're coming back under him, all right? And now we're going to see what's going to transpire with him furthermore. But continue for us.
Well, when he was informed that Herod had received the kingdom, new hopes came upon him, as having been himself still of a kind disposition towards him, and expecting that Herod would bear in mind what favor he had received from him. And when he was upon his trial, and he was in danger that a capital sentence would be pronounced against him, he delivered him from that danger and from all punishment.
All right, so remember, this Hyrcanus, he was good with the Edomites. He was good with Idumeans, all right? He was accepted of them. That's why they wanted to take down Aristobulus, all right? But then Hyrcanus didn't want to, deal with them, and they went and they took him down, all right? And he was over there. But he remembers that out of all of the Roman people, him and Herod, they had a good relationship. So he's like, Herod is the king now? Yo, I feel like I can go over there and Herod will put me in place now and make me do something. So that's what he's coming to mind now that he heard Herod is received the kingdom. So he's like, yo, I could go back over there. Herod will treat me gently, and I could become a priest or something over there under Herod. All right, because he believes him and Herod still have a little thing. All right, but continue for us.
Accordingly, he talked of that matter with the Jew that came often to him with great affection, But they endeavored to retain him among them, and desired that he would stay with them, putting him in mind of kind offices and honors they did him, and that those honors they paid him were not all at all inferior to what they could pay to either their high priest or their kings. And what was a greater motive to determine him, they said, was this, that he could not have those dignities in Judea because of that maim in his body, which had been inflicted on him by Antigonus, and that kings did not use to requite men for those kindnesses which they received when they were private persons, the height of their fortune making usually no small changes in them. Now, although they suggested these arguments to him for his own advantage, yet did Hyrcanus still desire to depart. Herod also wrote to him and persuaded him to desire of Phraates and the Jews that were there, that they should not grudge him the royal authority, which he should have jointly with himself. For now that was the proper time for himself to make him amends for the favors he had received from him, as having been brought up by him and saved by him also, as well as for Hyrcanus to receive it. And as he wrote thus to Hyrcanus, so did he send also Saramalis, his ambassador, to Phraates, and many presents with him, and desired him in the most obliging way that he would be no hindrance to his gratitude towards his benefactor. But his zeal of Herod's did not flow from that principle, but because he had been made governor of that country without having any just claim to it, he was afraid, and that upon reasons good enough of a change in his condition, and so made what haste he could to get Hyrcanus into power, or indeed to put him quite out of the way, which last thing he compassed afterward.
All right, so Hyrcanus is coming down. He's trying to either, he's making things to put him back into power. He's telling him to go down to Provokes and, take over there. They'll give him the royal authority. He can split it with me. So what's happening is Herod is knowing that Hyrcanus is coming back. And he's like, either he's going to split it with him and bring him someplace where he can rule. So he's directing him to where he should go. They'll receive you over there, go over there. Or once again, he's afraid that this brother is going to come and take back that which is rightfully his, because it's showing you that how did he get this power? All right, he's a governor of the country and he has no just claim to it. He has nothing by de jure. And we're going to go into what de jure is momentarily, all right? But he doesn't have a de jure right to it, all right? And the person that does have a de jure right to it can claim and come back and take it. So this is what Herod is really afraid of. And he's like, either I'm going to allow this man to rule a city or a place, all right, under this kingdom, or I'm going to have to take it. And they're saying he's actually going to come to the last, thought that he has, which is to take him out of the way. All right, so we're going to go to paragraph 4 and see what happens.
Accordingly, when Hyrcanus came, full of assurance by the permission of the king of Parthia, and at the expense of the Jews who supplied him with money, Herod received him with all possible respect and gave him the upper place at public meetings, and set him above all the rest of the feast, at feasts, and thereby deceived him, and called him father, and endeavored by all the ways possible that he might have no suspicion of any treacherous design against him.
All right, so right here, what Herod is doing, Herod receives him with all possible respect, puts him in the upper place, the public meetings, all right? He's above everybody at all the feasts, all right? And he's deceiving him. He's making him feel like it's comfortable, all right? And he calling him his father, all right? He's endeavoring by all ways possible to make him have no suspicion that, hey, he's about to take him down. And this is kind of funny because in the week there, I don't know if you guys heard, there was 3 people that went missing in Detroit, all right? 3 rappers, they say, all right, that went missing. They're able to call, they called their parents, all of them simultaneously, then their phones was turned off and they went missing. So these people went missing. They've now been found. They found them, I guess, in an abandoned abandoned home or whatever. But there was a thing online where they were showing one of the guys, he had a last live, and in the last live, he was talking to 3 masked men. They're all masked, but the other people on the side were 3 masked men, and it's kind of like he wasn't aware. The vibration was that these people are plotting on you, but he wasn't aware of the suspicion there. All right, and they even said to go on one of the guy's videos because I don't know how these people know all these people's name, but they went on his Facebook, and one of his last thing was be paranoid, trust nobody. So that was what he did 2 days where they said it would have been on those same days where the children or those guys would have went missing. But he's like, hey, don't trust nobody, be paranoid. But during the whole thing, the guy wasn't catching the vibration that these guys weren't really with him. But they were kind of keeping it on the thing, giving each other eye contact. But he's kind of lost, like, hey, yo, guys, I'm OG and this and that. And, this whole thing here. So it's funny that, this whole thing happened. And this is a whole thing on the news now where these 3 boys were gone missing. They're now found. Their phones was turned off. No, they're not alive. Yeah, they're dead. Yeah, so they called their parents. So they're supposed to go go to a concert. The concert got canceled. It was weird that all their phones is turned off at the same time. So if you know your phone is constantly sending a signal right now to the nearest tower so they can see exactly when it lost signal at that tower and when they called their parents. So that was led them to be, this is suspicious, right? And then they end up finding them dead. But once again, this whole thing is about they trusted somebody because somebody, was able to get to them and they didn't know this thing was happening. So a huge thing about watching your areas and people who are plotting against you. That's why I brought that up, because that was actual thing that happened in the week. Go check that story out. But this is what Harad is doing here, and he's not letting this guy know that. And this guy is going to end up missing out of nowhere too now. You get what I'm saying? Because he don't know what's going on. He's like, this brother's accepting me. I'm accepting, so I'm coming down. And we're going to see what happens. All right? But continue for us.
He also did other things in order to secure his government, which yet occasioned a sedition in his own family, for being cautious how he made any illustrious person the high priest of God. He sent for an obscure priest out of Babylon, whose name was Ananias, and bestowed the high priesthood upon him.
All right, so to also keep the people away and to make not a rightful person come into play and try to take over his rulership, he gets a high priest that's Babylonian, and he gives the Jews a Babylonian high priest because he's like, yo, I don't want to rise up one of their members from their bloodline because that's going to make them possibly want to turn from high priest to king. All right, so he's like, let me get a Babylonian king who's not going to want any of those rights. A Babylonian priest, all right, and make him high priest. So he goes and makes this Babylonian priest high priest, which is Ananias. All right, we'll continue for us.
Paragraph 5. However, Alexandra, the daughter of Hyrcanus and wife of Alexander, the son of Aristobulus, the king, who had also brought Alexander 2 children, could not bear this indignity. Now this son was one of the greatest comeliness, and was called Aristobulus, and the daughter, Miriam, was married to Herod, and eminent for her beauty also. This Alexandra was much disturbed, and took this indignity offered to her son exceeding ill, that while he was alive, anyone else should be sent for to have the dignity of the high priesthood conferred upon him. Accordingly, she wrote to Cleopatra, a musician assisting her in taking care to have her letters carried, to desire her intercession with Antony in order to gain the high priesthood for her son.
All right, so once again, at these times, there's some of the bloodlines that's still alive. All right, Aristobulus, this is another son. So there's like 3 Aristobulus. This is the next one that's, growing up now. She's saying that, hey, she has a sons here and they should be the high priest. And him making the Babylonian high priest, that shouldn't happen because somebody here is a rightful thing that could be high priest. So she is coming against this whole thing. And she's also the wife, married to Herod. All right, you can see that Herod has plenty of wives. He had like 10 wives. Some of them were Jews. He has a plethora of different wives. All right, because he's a king. All right. But continue for us. All right. Actually, no, we're stopped there. So we're gonna go now into what is de facto, because you're gonna see that Herod is operating a de facto state. All right, and we're gonna get into that out of the Bouvier's 1856 Law Dictionary.
All right, this is de facto out of the Bouvier's 1856 Law Dictionary. Indeed, a term used to denote a thing actually done. A president of the United States de facto is one in the exercise of the executive power, and is distinguished from one who being legally entitled to such power is ejected from it. The latter would be a president de jure. An officer de facto is frequently considered as an officer de jure, and his official acts are of equal validity.
So let me first give commentary on this one in the Bovier's one. So they try to hide the de facto as well because this what creates a lot of, I guess they would say, conspiracy theories, but it's alluding to it here. So a term used to denote a thing actually done. President of the United States is de facto. Is one in the exercise of executive power and distinguished from one who being legally entitled to such power is ejected from it. The latter would be a president by de jure. So if one president is elected and he's got it and he's president, he is president by de jure because that's the way they put it in. But if he becomes president by any way that's not regular, that is de facto because he is able to become president, but it's not by right. All right, it's by this de facto thing, which it doesn't really explain here well, but you're seeing here that, okay, there's a way that to go about something, that's the right way. This is the way it's always been. When someone comes outside of that way and becomes that thing, that's happening as a de facto. But we're going to go into the Black Law Dictionary and give further. So I put that in our thing. I'm going to put it in our learning group as well.
All right. This is de facto out of the Black's Law Dictionary. In fact, indeed, actually, this phrase is used to characterize an officer, a government, a past action, or a state of affairs which exists actually and must be accepted for all practical purposes, but which is illegal or illegitimate.
All right. So once again, it says this phrase is used or characterized of an officer, a government, a past action, a state of affair, which exists actually. So it's actually existing, must be accepted, but it's actually illegal. All right. All right. And illegitimate. All right. And you're going to see that a lot of the stuff in this world set up today is de facto. And I went through this in our monarchy versus republic to let people know how we move from kings to how we have presidents. All right. Kings, I went into that lesson to show that kings are appointed by God. All right. They get a kingdom. All right. This is reminiscent of Christ and Christ coming and bringing a kingdom. When people go away from this, because even the Gentile nations or other nations, they had what's called a heavens mandate, and they understood that the heavens governed their ruler, and if God was okay with it, he wouldn't bring destruction on their land. But if God wasn't, he would bring destruction and things on their land. And this is mentioned in the Wisdom of Solomon, all right, chapter 6. All right, these destructions come that the Most High governs with the heavens mandate. All right. When you move away from being a king and having a kingdom, all right, these are people that are doing things that God is not okay with. And this is even in our law. So you can't run away from this. So some people might be, is this stuff real? Is this that? This is what all law is based upon in the world. All right. So when they start removing kings, they would put up what's called a republic, a state. These things are de facto illegitimate. What's legitimate is a king. The king is chosen by God, and he's placed to rule over the people. If the ruler is not a king, understand that we're in a de facto illegitimate time. And that's why we're to understand that a lot of kingdoms have gone away from God. Once the people set up a republic, they're showing that, hey, I don't want a king over me. I don't want to be ruled by a king. They're going against what God set up. And that's when they create a republic. From there, the republic turns into democracy. All right. But these are all states. These are all de factos. These are all illegitimate. They're not done according to God. We're seeing right here in the Bible, the Jews, and they're setting their stuff up according to how God was and having kingdoms and all of that. And we're seeing the Roman, the republic, all of that taking over, creating a state, putting people in play who they want by vote or whatever, but not by God, not by right. All right. When that happens, that's called de facto. Majority of the places that we're in right now are de facto. If we're not in a kingdom, it's de facto. In Canada, we have the queen over us. She's in what? The United Kingdom. England is a kingdom. Over here is not a kingdom. This is the queen's companies, corporations. Provinces is corporations. These are her companies. The governors are the leaders of the corporation that she put in place over here to run as companies. All right, people have to understand this. This is the real world. It's not just Bible, fairy tale. This is how the world operates. All right, this is how they're able to operate. So if no one's going to declare that they're a king, guess what? They can continuously operate. All right, because you don't think about this. You're not trying to get a right or nothing. So the state and the de facto-ness continually can happen unless someone by right comes and says something, which we're going back to why Herod is afraid of Hyrcanus, Aristobulus, who are the rightful rulers of this empire. And he's afraid that, hey, if they go to international law, if they go to this, they're going to override my rulership. So we're kind of understanding how law goes and ruling and all of that. You can't just rule to rule, but you can if you don't have someone who understands that you have the right to rule to contest that. We also see that in where? We've seen that in Black Panther, all right? The bloodline family. You know that you have right to a family. A lot of African people know this. When they have their right into their family, they're going to throw their hat and say, I'm contesting that. I have right to the throne. I should be ruling by right. All right, and these are things that have been embedded on down from ancient times.
So by being quiet, they're acquiescing their rightful claim.
Correct. Which is why you see Herod here as a problem, because he's like, these men are going to go talk. They're going to go talk to the kings. And they might reverse what's happening. So to keep his de facto state, he has to kill anybody who believes they have right by blood. All right, so this is what we're seeing here. Or don't put that person who has right by blood into a powerful position. So this is why he's refraining from making one of the Jews a high priest. Because he's like, if they're high priests, he could be like, oh, I'm a high priest. I should be king, priest and king, right? So this is what he's kind of afraid of. So we're going to go to the definition of de jure.
Oh, we didn't finish.
Okay, actually finish reading the definition de facto. Yes, give it to us.
All right. In this sense, it is the contrary of de jure, which means rightful, legitimate, just, or constitutional. Thus, an officer, king, or government de facto is one who is in actual possession of the office or supreme power, but by usurpation. To lawful title, while an officer, king, or governor de jure is one who has just claim and rightful title to office or power, but one who has never had plenary possession of the same, or is not now in actual possession. So a wife de facto is one whose marriage is voidable by decree, as distinguished from a wife de jure or lawful wife. But the term is also frequently used independently of any distinction from de jure. Thus, a blockade de facto is a blockade which is actually maintained, as distinguished from a mere paper blockade. As to de facto, corporation, court, domicile, government, and officer. See these titles. In Old English, de facto means respecting or concerning the principal act of a murder, which was technically denominated factum.
All right, so those are other terms how de facto could be spent. But what we're more so looking at, once again, is the illegal or legitimate right of a king who's ruling. They're only ruling because they have the power to rule and they usurped it. They don't have the right to rule by law. And what we're trying, especially those in the community, we're trying to make them understand that this community especially is written and spoken of from the ancient time. This is what Christ came through the Essenes. These people were separated from all these people. We have these rights to rule, all right? When you understand who you are, this is what they're afraid of, because you will start declaring these things in law, all right? And us as a community, we understand that we have certain rights that we're working towards. Many people might not understand exactly what's happening right now, all right? But we understand these de jure rights, and we're moving our community towards what we're seeing the Jews left away from, all right? But once again, it takes speaking to the right people, declaring it to the right people, all right? Operating in a certain law, which is why we started off with going into the law, to make people know that the law is a part of your everyday today right now, all right? So once again, de jure is something, de facto is something that happens that's illegitimate, that's illegal, but it's happened because of the power is able to do it. All right. It's something that hasn't happened by right, but it's happened because it's happened. All right. While de jure is something that happens by a legitimate right. All right. And Herod is afraid because he doesn't have legitimate right to be a king of these people. There's no legitimate right of the people in their laws or their custom that's making him a king. He's there because he took them down through war, and he's forcefully made himself king. And he knows that in law, in international law, all of that, they're going to look at that and be like, that's a no-no, which is why to continue this, you have to eliminate anyone who will contend against it. All right. So we're going to continue. We're going to go to Herod is now deciding to rebuild the temple at Jerusalem. All right. And this temple is the temple that Christ is going to come to. So we're going to see that Herod, after he takes everything down, he spoils the country. He's ruling now. He's trying to bring down the families who have the bloodline to not call their de jure rights. He's now in control. He's going to now say, hey, I want to build me a temple to God. Because we're seeing he had a respect for God. He didn't want to destroy the temple. He didn't want the Gentiles to go see the sacred things. Now he's going to build an illustrious temple. All right, up. So we're going to go to the works of Flavius Josephus once again.
The works of Flavius Josephus, chapter 11. How Herod rebuilt the temple and raised it higher and made it more magnificent than it was before, as also concerning that tower which he called Antonia. Paragraph 1. And now Herod, in the 18th year of his reign, and after the acts already mentioned, undertook a very great work, that is, to build of himself the temple of God, and make it larger in compass, and to raise it to a most magnificent altitude, as esteeming it to be the most glorious of all his actions.
All right, so he's trying to be like Solomon. He's like, yo, I want to build God a glorious temple and raise it up. All right, but once again, we've seen it come from the Greeks, and these people completely disrespect the temple of God and all of that. And we can kind of maybe see how we contrast into this Roman Christian empire where, hey, they'll take down people who are against, what they're going against, but they're going to give a certain respect to God whenever they do that. All right, and we see that even right now. They took it over, but guess what? They're allowing Christianity in Rome. You get what I'm saying? That's where the first place it was allowed. So it seems like they understood, possibly by their sorcery, by whatever, that, hey, this is a way we can get control over taking down people who's going against God, and then not going against God herself, but try to, give worship, praise unto God. All right. So we're going to continue and see.
As it really was, to bring it to perfection, and that this would be sufficient for an everlasting memorial of him. But as he knew the multitude were not ready nor willing to assist him in so vast a design, he thought to prepare them first by making a speech to them, and then set about the work itself. So he called them together and spake thus to them: I think I need not speak to you, my countrymen, about such other works as I have done since I came to the kingdom, although I may say they have been performed in such a manner as to bring more security to you than glory to myself.
All right, so he's trying to show them, the things I've done, the stopping them from making the place desolate and all of that stuff. This is not really for me, for security for me, but I've been security for y'all. I've been helping y'all. I've been holding things back. I've been doing things that are bringing not glory for me, but security for you. All right, but continue.
For I have neither been negligent in the most difficult times about what tended to ease your necessities, nor have the buildings. I have been so proper to preserve me as yourselves from injuries, and I imagine that with God's assistance, I have advanced the nation of the Jews to a degree of happiness which they never had before.
All right, so he's saying that with God's assistance, he believes he's advanced the nation of the Jews to a degree of happiness which they never had before, even though they're a state right now and not a kingdom. They're not controlling their own affairs. All right. Yeah, but they're supposedly happy than never before. All right, but continue.
And for the particular edifices belonging to your own country and your own cities, as also to those cities that we have lately acquired, which you have erected and greatly adorned, and thereby augmented the dignity of your nation. It seems to me a needless task to enumerate them to you, since you well know them yourselves. But as to that undertaking which I have a mind to set about at present, and which will be a work of the greatest piety and excellence that can possibly be undertaken by us, I will now declare it to you. Our fathers, indeed, when they were returned from Babylon, built this temple to God Almighty. Yet does it want 60 cubits of its largeness and altitude. For so much did that first temple which Solomon built exceed this temple. Nor let anyone condemn our fathers for their negligence or want of piety herein. For it was not their fault that the temple was no higher. For they were Cyrus and Darius, the son of Histopis, who determined the measure for its rebuilding. And it had been by reason of the subjection of those fathers of ours to them and to their posterity, and after them to the Macedonians, that they had not the opportunity to follow the original model of this pious edifice, nor could raise it to its ancient altitude. But since I am now by God's will your governor, I have had peace a long time, and have gained great riches and large revenues. And what is the principal filling of all? I am at amity with all, and well regarded by the Romans, who, if I may so say, are the rulers of the whole world. I will do my endeavor to correct that imperfection which hath arisen from the necessity of our affairs, and the slavery we have been under formerly, and to make a thankful return after the most pious manner to God, for what blessings I have received from him, by giving me this kingdom, that by rendering his temple as complete as I am able.
All right, so we're seeing that even though he's doing all of this, he's paying a respect to the Most High, to his things. He's building him a temple. He's doing all of this stuff here. All right. And once again, the Israelites at this time, when they went back to the temple, they were supposed to operate it according to how Ezekiel seen in his vision, and the sons of Zadok were to be the ones giving the sacrifice, and they weren't doing that. So they already weren't operating the temple according to how Cyrus and Ezekiel, all of them seen it in that vision, how they're supposed to build it. And this is what led to all of this stuff happening, and the Israelites are not seeing that, hey, the sons of Zadok are not the leading people of the priesthood, therefore the Most High is not going to be in agreement with it. Therefore, he's allowing these things to happen, and he's going to allow Herod to do what he does, because Herod is also giving respects unto God as well. All right. And he's thinking to build the Most High a temple as complete as he's able. And this is the temple you're going to see that Christ is actually coming to. This temple was built by Herod. All right. It was reassembled. All right. It's the same spot, but it's new construction. All right. Renovation. All right. You know, when the mall adds, how much different parts to it? Yorkdale is Yorkdale, but it don't look like the same Yorkdale. That's what Herod did. That old Yorkdale that you see, it's still the same Yorkdale. But he done changed everything out, raised up the walls, took all the cheap stores out, designer, everything, and we got a New Yorkdale. All right? That's what Herod did to the temple in these times.
At those times, there was no doubt that there was a God.
Yeah. Right. They understood God, right? We're seeing that all the people believed, especially in Israel, they had no doubt following God, following his stuff, keeping his laws exact. So we're right here, the whole story, we're seeing a lot of violations, image of God, violation. Out here, it starts to get cleaned up, but we're not seeing a lot of violations against the image of God. It's really political things. People are not putting the sons of Zadok in, but they're not dealing with idols and all of that stuff. That's not happening right now. They're dealing with the Most High. Their stuff might be off because the Essenes aren't there to correct them. So a lot of their stuff is off, which we see Christ comes and is correcting about the Pharisees, but they're not dealing with idols. It's the technicalities of their laws that's the problem. But idol worship and all of that is not the problem anymore right now. All right. Until we get to here. So here we're going to see polite. All right. Or polite. Say polite. Pilate. All right. All right. But Pilate. All right. We're going to see Pilate is going to endeavor to do something. All right. and bring it into Jerusalem. So we're going to take a look at what's happening. So this is a first major violation of the image of God that we're going to see for a long time. All right. So we're at the works of Flavius Josephus.
The works of Flavius Josephus, book 18, containing the interval of 32 years, from the banishment of Archelaus to the departure from Babylon, chapter 3, sedition of the Jews against Pontius Pilate, concerning Christ and what befell Paulina and the Jews at Rome. But now Pilate, procurator of Judea, removed the army from Caesarea to Jerusalem to take their winter quarters there, in order to abolish the Jewish laws. So he introduced Caesar's effigies, which were upon the ensigns, and brought them into the city, whereas our law forbids us to vary making of images. On which account the former procurators were wont to make their entry into the city with such ensigns as had not those ornaments. Pilate was the first who brought those images to Jerusalem and set them up there, which was done without the knowledge of the people, because it was done in the nighttime.
All right. So what we're seeing here is that, all right, they're introducing Caesar's effigies. All right. And these are pictures. All right. Ensigns. And they're bringing them into the city. All right. And the law forbids them of making those images. All right. The law forbids them from making those images, and they're bringing these images into Jerusalem. All right. Pilate is the first to start bringing these type of images into Jerusalem. They haven't had this for a long time, where we're looking at all the stuff. They've been actually fighting against paganism and, defiling the temple since the Maccabean time. All right. But now, all right, they have a ruler who's there, and now they're trying to bring in images again into the kingdom, and we're seeing the response from the people concerning that. All right, we're going to go into the definition real quick.
Going to go into the definition of procurator. All right. Procurator was a title of certain officials in ancient Rome who were in charge of the financial affairs of a province, or imperial governor of a minor province. So that was the definition of procurator.
All right, so you're going to see that there were there were a couple procurators there, because they're over the province, one over the province of Galilee, Judea, Samaria, the other ones. You're going to see that they start to fight over jurisdiction of Christ, and which one is going to deal with Christ after. All right, but continue for us.
But as soon as they knew it, they came in multitudes to Caesarea, and interceded with Pilate many days that he would remove the images. And when he would not grant their request, because it would tend to injury of Caesar, while yet they preserved in their request, in their request on the 6th day, he ordered his soldiers to have their weapons privately, while he came and sat upon his judgment seat, which seat was so prepared in the open place of the city, that it concealed the army that lay ready to oppress them. And when the Jews petitioned him again, he gave a signal to the soldiers to encompass them routed, and threatened that their punishment should be no less than immediate death, unless they would leave off disturbing him and go their ways home. But they threw themselves upon the ground and laid their necks bare, and said they would take their death very willingly, rather than the wisdom of their laws should be transgressed. Upon which Pilate was deeply affected with their firm resolution to keep their laws inviolable, and presently commanded the image to be carried back to Jerusalem to Caesarea.
All right. So the Jews were petitioning. They're saying, nah, they don't want to do that. They're ready to die immediate death. All right. Then to allow them to put these images there. So we're seeing that the Jews, they learned from all these times to say, hey, we're not trying to violate the image of God by dealing with idols and worship. But what we're learning from the image of God lesson, that there's multiple ways to violate the image of God. All right. The first one we've seen is, okay, you're not worshiping the image of God. There's killing your brother. There's not listening to the Most High. It's not just the idols, but they're so focused on the idol right now. And this is what they don't understand, right? They're so focused on just the idol and not dealing with the command of God and doing what he says. He said when you came to do this stuff to set up the sons of Zadok as the priests. And that hasn't happened. We don't see no sons of Zadok here. We went into that they left because they're like, hey, we're supposed to be here. They're not liking us. So they left. They're in the wilderness. They're gone, separated from all what's happening. All these bloodlines we're seeing that's fighting over priesthood, all of that stuff, that's not the bloodline of Zadok. All right.
They're fighting in vain.
Yeah, they're fighting in vain. They're not doing the Most High told them to set the priest up a certain way. It doesn't matter who you're making to do that. He told you to, if you want to deal with something, to do it a certain way. All right. All right. But yeah, continue for us.
All right. It's paragraph 2. All right. Well, Pilate undertook to bring a current of water to Jerusalem and did it with the sacred money and derived the origin of the stream from the distance of 200 furlongs. However, the Jews were not pleased with what had been done about this water, and many 10,000s of people got together and made a clamor against him and insisted that he should leave off that design. Some of them also used reproaches and abused the man, as crowds of such people usually do. So he habited a great number of his soldiers in their habit, who carried daggers under their garments, and sent them to a place where they might surround them. So he bid the Jews himself go away, but they boldly, casting reproaches upon him, he gave the soldiers that signal which had been beforehand agreed on, who laid upon them much greater blows than Pilate had recommended them, and equally punished those that were tumultuous, and those that were not, nor did they spare them in the least. And since the people were unarmed, and were caught by men prepared for what they were about, there were a great number of them slain by this means, and others of them ran away wounded. And thus an end was put to this sedition.
All right. So because he did this, this made the Jews be like, yo, we need to take back this stuff over. And they start to try to come against them and stuff. And he had to, once again, put them back down to flight to control them again. Because once the Jews are seeing, hey, these people are not going to make us want to do our worship. They want to bring idols in here. They're doing all of this. The Jews are very serious about keeping their law right now. So he had to now back them up again now. All right. Because the Jews are being bold again to try to, reestablish their priesthood. All right. To make sure that nothing's going to happen. All right. But continue now.
Paragraph 3. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, that those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day.
All right, so this is Josephus writing all of this. He's kind of going through history and giving us a history. So he's not really writing it at the times that the stuff is happening. All right, so he's already able to give you the story that Christ is being born about the same time that this sedition happens. So about the same time where the worship of Caesar is trying to step into Jerusalem, this is Christ is now being born on the scene now. All right. All right, well, not being born, he was coming up about this time. So Salakia for that. He was coming up about this time, all right, and was doing his works and things during the same time. So he's starting to rise up a little, but not here yet, all right. So we're going to actually go to the Bible. So we're going to end with these last two scriptures here in the New Testament, and we'll be come back with it next week. So we're just going to go to the Bible now just to look at Herod, all right, at the time of Christ's birth. So we're at Matthew 21:1.
It's the book of St. Matthew, chapter 21, verse 1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born.
All right, so now we see Christ being born in Bethlehem of Judea. We are in the days of Herod the king. The story of the New Testament should be a little clearer to how we got up to all this happenings. All right, we're at the story of Herod the king. Now, we already just went through Herod understands about de jure and de facto. He's heard, remember, the whole Bible and the whole Jewish culture, the Jew culture, Israelite culture is about the Messiah coming, the rightful owner. All right, so he's like, hold on, I just battled out all these guys. I just got the kingdom. I just, was able to establish what I'm doing here. Rumor the Messiah has been born has gone out. This is why it's troubling him. He's like, again, right now, someone's going to try to come against the legitimacy of what I'm doing. All right, my de facto state. He's hearing that the true king has been born, the one that they all been waiting for, the one that's supposed to get the kingdom and everything now. All right.
The line of David.
Yes, right. The conquering lion of Judah from the line of David. Yes. Herod has heard that, and this is troubling him, and all Jerusalem with him. So Jerusalem at this time is even with Herod, and they're like, "Oh man, what's going on?" All right, because they're loving what's going on under Herod. All right, so he wants to know where Christ is going to be born. All right, so we're now going to go and just going to look at Herod, and actually, you know what? We're going to actually stop there. We're going to go into all of that next week. All right, so we're stopping right there, and this is Christ being born, Herod being scared. We're stopping at him. What's his whole thing? He wants to keep the kingdom for himself, but he can't because he knows it's de facto, so he's been trying to eliminate priests that would come and challenge that, kings that would come and challenge that. Christ has now been born. This is where we are now in the image of God. We see that the Jews at this time, they're paying great respect to the temple, the laws of God, the sacrifices. They're trying to do everything exact. Even when they're battling people, not one sacrifice is missed at its appointed exact time. All right, which is how strict the law is. All right, which is there's no way we could be under the law now, because if you're not doing it at that exact time, it's over. We see how much the Jews had to do to make sure that everything was to the exact, even under distress. All right. And now we're in the time of Herod. We're able to see how Herod went and took the kingdom. All right. Defeated the people. We were able to see Hyrcanus be helped in Persia. We're kind of able to see international law in this as well. That how when you're in bondage and you're taken from your own land where you have right from it, you go amongst other nations and you plead your cause to them and tell them what's happening, that you can get asylum there. They'll give you some of your rights back there. They'll put you to where you're supposed to be there, but you just can't be in your country. But they'll let you be in a region in their area. All right. And then we see him try to come back to take it because his brethren, Herod, came into power and he's thinking he could get that. Herod fools him, brings him in, makes everybody entreat him. He then takes him down. All right. Because Herod is trying to ensure that his de facto government can continue. And this is once again a message to right now. A lot of these governments, if it doesn't say kingdom, it's de facto. If it's not ruled by a king, it's ruled the same way you're seeing Herod come into rule right here. All right. And if people don't believe in Christ, don't believe in their right in Christ, don't believe that Christ made you priest and king when you come and you're reborn in him, and you're never declaring this in the law or whatever, then they're never going to respect your rights. And we're in a climate right now where they realize that people are asleep, and guess what they're doing? They're moving in on your rights right now. Your rights are being taken away from you right now. And if you don't speak up for your right, you'll be in a de facto state where you'll be doing things that are illegal that are placed against you. All right. And what we're seeing here, you got to speak up. They're afraid of people who speak up. What is the problem that Herod had? He's afraid that people who have the true right will speak up. That's the problem he has. Christ is now born. Guess what? Christ is going to speak up. This is why he has a problem with Christ being born. Someone's going to speak up and take what's rightfully theirs. In order for us to take what's rightfully ours, you got to speak up. You got to understand. You got to believe, all right, in the things that are here. We're seeing all of this stuff in the Bible translated, still coming on down to our time right now. We're in a time where most people don't even believe this stuff, which is why They can't come against this stuff.
All right, this is the book of Galatians, chapter 4. Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all.
All right. So the heir, as long as he is a child, different from nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. So when this person is a child, all right, it's hard for them to be king and reign too. All right. If you're not in that position, you're going to be the same too. So if you're a heir and you're a child, it's going to be like you're a servant. All right. And if you're a heir and you're not in your position, then you're like a servant as well too. All right. Though you're supposed to be Lord of everything. All right. But continue.
Verse 2. But as under tutors and governors until the appointed time of the Father. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father.
All right, so they're under the law. So higher kindness in them, they're under the law, they're under the bondage. What is Herod afraid of? He's afraid that God's going to send the Spirit into them to cry out, Abba, Father, to claim their rights. I'm this of God. This is my right. Da, da, da. And when they cry it out, there's nothing nobody can do. All right, so this is what he was afraid of. The Spirit in them is going to cry out, this is mine. I'm a part of God. I'm a legitimate of God. I'm God's son. I'm a king of God. But when you go into king and those in royalty, we show that those are people who God is okay with. All right. When you have a king, understand that God has been okay with that appointment of that king if it's done de jure. All right.
The records were fresh back then too, because like this guy threw some water on the Pharaoh, matched them up, matched up Jericho. Like if he comes to the aid of this person, we're done.
Yeah. So they gave respect unto the Most High, being able to witness this stuff. So anytime someone was going to say, hey, they're a child of God, they're from this priesthood or whatever, they were going to be let go. And this is what we're showing here, that God has to send into your heart for you to be like, no, because people say, yeah, I'm a child of God. But when they're outside, they're not thinking it in this mindset that we're showing here now, that you have legitimacy to a kingdom that's God's. He said that we're all going to be kings and priests, all right, under him, all right? And the only way for you to do that is to declare that through your mouth. Once again, repeating again what Herod is afraid of, people with de jure rights coming to speak up to end his empire, his kingdom, his throne. Christ has now been born. He's terrified. The people are terrified. They know the rightful ruler is going to come to speak up, to take what's his. All right. So once again, we want to say all praises be unto the Most High Almighty, Ahaya Yeshahaya Christ. We're going to go to Philippians 4 and 8.
It's the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true.
All right, so it's true. It's true that Herod came and he took the kingdom away from the Jews, the Asamoneans, the Hasmoneans, the rest of the Maccabean Empire. All right, it's true that he took that kingdom and he became king by decree of the Roman Senate. It's true, all right, but also de facto that he's ruling the empire of Judea. All right, it's true that when he took everything down and he's ruling, guess what? He paid a respect unto God. He didn't allow the nations to spoil everything. He didn't allow them to lift up the skirts of the temple and see the hidden parts of the temple. All right. He protected those things. He used his money, all right, to pay off the spoilers who wanted to spoil and plunder the city that they rightfully had gotten through war. All right. He paid them off. He then had it in his heart to erect a temple magnificent up onto God in his time. All right. It's true that he wants to be king over Judea. And this is not something the Romans are interested in. This is something that he personally has an interest in by giving his personal funds to secure this thing. All right. It's true that he got frustrated. He got scared when Christ was born, knowing that the rightful heir can come speak up. And this is what he's afraid of. All right, continue for us.
Whatsoever things are honest, Whatsoever things are just.
All right, it's just these things that were happening when two countries go to war, two enemies go to war, and they say, "Here, we're gonna go to war for this," and they get taken down. These are just things that happen to them when they get spoiled, when they get plundered. These are things of war. This is international law concerning these things. When it goes an opposite way of that stuff, they call it piracy. All right, continue for us.
Whatsoever things are pure.
All right, what's pure? Once again, the worship of God. All right, not just the worship of God, not just making sure idols is not there, but doing things according to what God wants. God wants the sons of Zadok to offer up to him the holy sacrifice. All right, that's what he wants. All right, he wants it to be under the priests who kept, all right, his sanctuary, who kept his things pure when the children of Israel went astray, when the Levites went astray. All right, and they're not doing that. The Essenes had to leave from these societies during the Maccabean time when they see these guys under Jonathan doing treaties with the Romans, fraternizing with the enemy. All right, says we're not to deal with no works of darkness. All right, not to be united with that. Continue for us.
Whatsoever things are lovely.
All right, it's lovely when we're worshiping the Most High, worshiping the image of God. The kingdom is in peace when that's happening. We're seeing a whole lot of turmoil in the Bible during these 400 years, during the times of the Maccabean, where a lot of turmoil has happened because guess what? They just didn't follow the Most High in the beginning, like how David did, like how under Solomon was going, until Solomon turned his heart away from God. Continue for us.
Whatsoever things are of a good report.
All right, it's a good report when these things come back, when we're doing the things that the Most High wants, when we're giving praise unto the image of God, when we're not breaking these rules against the image of God, no violations against that, then we're not causing the Most High to be a consuming fire, all right? Zealous in pursuit of punishment for offenses against the image of God. Continue for us.
If there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you.
All right, so once again, all right, this was the consuming fire, the image of God, versus the image that provokes, the glorification of the Son. This is part 8. We are now at the time of Herod being king. We're at the time of Christ being born. We're understanding de jure, de facto. We're understanding that you got to speak up. If you have a right, by right, know that the people that are in place illegitimately are scared of those who have a voice, who have things by right, all right, who have government by right, who have bloodline that says they have rights. They want you to be quiet about that. That's what we're understanding today at the end of this. So with that being said, we want to say all praises be unto the Most High Almighty, Ahaya Shahaya Christ, our Lord and Savior, who the world calls Jesus Christ. This is the SC Community Church of Christ. My name is Archbishop Shamar.
And I'm Bishop Micah Allah.
And that was your Sabbath report / lesson. Once again, enjoy the rest of the Sabbath. We do have the Lord's Day coming tomorrow. This church here, we deal with both days, the Sabbath day and the Lord's Day. We know that the Sabbath day is a representation of the 1,000-year rest that Christ is going to bring to the earth, where we can relax, really get to live in the earth the real way it was supposed to. And then after that 1,000-year reign, we'll have the new heaven and new earth, where he'll change what we see today, and we'll have a whole new thing. That's what the Lord's Day represents, all right? And that's for eternity, all right? And that's immortal. That's without death in that kingdom. All right, so with that being said, peace and blessings. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.